Hi Eggman, I wanted to do a response video to your deciding to believe post. I'm normally a big fan of your content, but I had to take issue with this one because the epistemology that you put forward in this video is frankly, I think, kind of naive, and I mean that with all due respect. So, for example, one of the things you said early on in the video is that you don't believe that the sun is going to rise tomorrow. You know the sun is going to rise tomorrow. That's a big red flag for me because epistemologists, since as far back as Plato, have defined knowledge in terms of belief. Plato's definition of knowledge was justified, true belief. And there's been some upheavals in that in the 20th century, alternate definitions, competing definitions. But for the most part, pretty much everyone agrees that belief is a component of knowledge. If you know something, then you must also believe it. So turning then to your point about the specifics, will the sun rise tomorrow? That proposition was actually specifically threatened in the 18th century by David Hume, who put forward what's known as the problem of induction. Long story short, what the problem says is that the future is under no obligation to mimic the past. Just because the sun has risen every morning prior to now does not necessarily mean it's going to rise tomorrow. There's all sorts of things that could happen. It's quite possible that the Earth might actually just stop spinning, through no explicable mechanism that would able to make sense of it to us. That seems unlikely, of course, given everything that we know. But what if, as an alternative, what if the sun went nova tomorrow, or before the next sunrise? And that doesn't seem terribly likely, given what we know about stars and how they go nova. But we can't exclude it for sure, and that means that we can't really say that we know the sun is going to rise tomorrow, unless, of course, you want to define knowledge in some sort of practical sense that doesn't include absolute certainty, which is a reasonable move. But if that's what you're going to do, you really need to flag that. You can't just assume that's going to be the case. Next up, some comments on your adultery thought experiment, where you have the evidence shoved in front of you, recordings and pictures and so forth. I got to go to David Hume here, because he really shed light on this issue. And in the philosophy of science, since Hume, there's been a general principle that's understood that says evidence always underdetermines explanation. And what that means is that no matter how much evidence you have, there will be at least two possible explanations that account for all the data. And there's no amount of evidence that can possibly distinguish between those two explanations. So, in your case, we have all this evidence, all this data, but here's an alternate possibility. Maybe she's actually cheating on you, but maybe she's being framed. You've heard of Photoshop. You know that these things can be faked. And that might not seem very plausible. And in fact, if I were to see pictures of my wife cheating on me and so forth, I probably would come to the same conclusion. But that's still not a 100% certain conclusion. There's always alternate possible explanations. So this picture that you have of us just sort of being forced to believe, that's a picture that's sort of been out of fashion, at least since Immanuel Kant. Ever since the Kantian turn in epistemology, philosophers have tended to hold that we actually participate in the construction of reality in our mind. We're not just passive receptors. We're not just sponges just taking in the world around us. We have to actually choose what evidence to countenance, what to pay attention to, what's relevant, what's not. Most of this, of course, is unconscious. We're not sort of just aware of it in the way that we're aware of most of our choices, but they are choices, and we do participate in that construction of our own epistemic world. To give sort of a concrete example of this, one that you almost sort of hit on, you can choose to be a trusting, gullible person, or you can choose to be a suspicious and incredulous person. And you might have to cultivate those attitudes over time. It's not like you can just flip a switch and go back and forth between one or the other. But if you really, really want to cultivate skepticism, you can do that over time. If you want to cultivate credulity, you can do that over time. So your decisions can very much have a profound effect on what you believe, even though you're not sort of choosing them in the way you might say choose what you eat for dinner. And that's an important point to really to stress and to undermine, because to say that you don't choose your beliefs in any capacity is a form of what Jean-Paul Sartre calls bad faith. It's an attempt to avoid responsibility. We are responsible for what we believe and why we believe it, and we have to take that responsibility on our shoulders. We can't just say that it wasn't our choice, that we had it forced upon us. That's simply not the way it works. That's not to say that belief is completely voluntary. That's we don't choose it, like I say, the way we choose what we eat for dinner. Probably the better comparison is to say that belief is semi-voluntary. It's kind of like breathing. Most of the time we do it without thinking, we do it automatically, but if we choose to pay attention to it, if we choose to force it, we can hold our breath or we can breathe really rapidly. But we do exert some control over it. Maybe not complete control, maybe not total control, but some control. And we have to own up to that, because the picture of the human mind that has evolved and developed over the last 3 centuries or so, through Hume and Kant and even into modern neuroscience. Again, this isn't just philosophy. There's a lot of scientific background, contemporary scientific suggestions that show that this is the way the mind works as well. One good illustration of this would probably be the creationist Kurt Wise, which you may have heard of. He was highlighted in Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion. He was a student of Stephen Jay Gould and got a degree in anthropology, I believe it was, and knew an awful lot about science and data, and came to a sort of a crisis moment in his life where he realized that what he was learning was in conflict with his biblical beliefs. And one night took a pair of scissors to the Bible and cut out everything that he would have to reject if he were to accept the evolutionary theory which he had been taught and which he was tempted to believe, and then was left with almost nothing left in the Bible and had to make a choice. What was he going to believe? Was he going to believe the evidence, or was he going to believe the Bible? And he made a very clear, very deliberate choice to reject the evidence and follow the Bible. It's not that he contested the facts. He fully conceded that all the data, all the evidence, all the facts did point to an old earth and an old universe, and even to evolution and common descent. What he decided was that he wasn't going to let his beliefs be dictated by the data and the evidence. And I agree with you that that is a really scary path to go down, but you have to admit he's making a choice. It's a very deliberate, very specific choice that he's making. And so that's just concrete evidence right there that people do, in fact, choose what to believe. Now, you don't see yourself as choosing what to believe. You see yourself as being committed to your beliefs based on data and evidence. But that's because, whether you are aware of it or not, you have made a choice to comport your beliefs to the data and to the facts. And that's a choice that I've made as well. But let's be honest with ourselves here. It's a choice that we've made. That's not to say that one belief is just as good as any other, that we don't have good reasons to prefer our epistemology to their epistemology. But we do have to be honest that choices do, to an extent, have an impact on what we believe and why we believe it. So that means that, in a sense, in a very real sense, we do in fact decide to believe.